Hi, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to Produce, Mix, Fix and Conquer. My name is Rich Steve Beck. I'm the founder of this community. Welcome. If you're not already a member of our community, feel free to join facebook.com/groups/produce, mix, fix and conquer. Also, feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/produce, mix, fix and conquer. So excited to be interviewing our next guest. So our next guest has been a mastering engineer since the early 80s. He's mastered for Oasis, R.E.M, Simply Red, London Grammar, Natalie Imbruglia, Tom Walker, and many, many more. He's also the Facebook audio king of the dad jokes. And without further ado, Mr. Barry Baz Grint. How you doing, Baz?
Hello, mate. I'm just going through Facebook, and there seems to be a load of stuff on here about some geezer I've never heard of.
Oh, amazing.
How you doing? You all right?
I'm really good, mate. How are you?
Yeah, not bad. I seem to have caught the sun a bit, sitting in the garden today, but hey.
It's life, absolutely. Really excited to have a chat with you, and thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you. Really excited to find out about your history as a mastering engineer and where you're up to now as well, and have a good chat with you about mastering on vinyl, which, to be honest, I don't know a lot about. So I'm really looking forward to picking your brains, and I'm sure a lot of people on our community and other communities are looking forward to hearing your thoughts and what your day looks like when you're mastering for some of the best artists in the world. So before we begin, I'd really like to maybe have a chat with you to begin with, like we've done with all our previous guests on Produce, Mix, Fix and Conquer, and have a chat about your backstory, if that's cool with you. So right at the beginning, as a kid, what music were you listening to growing up?
Pretty broad. So I suppose during the influential years, that was when Capital Radio started.
Yep.
So, predominantly chart-based, but also, they had quite a broad church when it came to the music that they played. So there'd be a bit of reggae, a bit of two-tone, some really kind of left field stuff that you wouldn't necessarily hear. And you just kind of get into things that you'd never would have known about if it hadn't have just been played. And I think it's one of the things that's a pity today, that radio is so segmented that, you can decide that you like a particular genre and never have to move from it. So you never get that kind of, oh, I haven't heard of that, but that sounds good. It doesn't happen anymore, which is a shame.
Yeah, completely. So what about, you're so right about that, but what about as a kid as well? When you were growing up, did you play the instruments as well as listen to music? Did you, what were you playing back then?
Yeah, there was a government scheme to encourage kids to play instruments. And I chose the clarinet because, hey, that's the sexiest instrument in the whole world.
Absolutely.
I didn't realize about saxophone players, otherwise I would have definitely gone saxophone instead. So yeah, I learned to play the clarinet. Was okay. Then, there was the inevitable budget cuts, so the lessons stopped. And so did I. But I'm haunted to this day by Stranger on the Shore by Abbey.
All right.
It follows me around like a nightmare. I did it once. I in one of my many jobs that I've had, I was working on a TV show, and Abbey was on there, and I got the opportunity to tell him how he cursed my life, and he took it very well.
Brilliant. Amazing. So how did you transition then from playing the clarinet to getting into audio? How did that happen, and how did you get the bug for working in studios? Tell us your story.
Well, it's all terribly anarchy. I'm a mastering engineer. It's what you'd expect. So I had the important job of dealing with the record player in assembly.
Yeah.
When I was at school, and then we had quite a good stage lighting setup. So I got involved in doing stage lighting. Got involved in hospital radio. Built new radio studios for them. Built a radio studio at home just for me. Built a mobile disco. Just had an interest in that sort of thing. And there was a guy who joined the hospital radio. Like me, he wasn't particularly interested in being a DJ, but just doing engineering. So I showed him what I'd picked up about tape delays and tape loops and, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then he got working at Trident Studios. And when they were looking for another runner, he said, "Why don't you have a chat with this guy?" And mugs that they are, they took me on.
Amazing. And then I understand that you got trained up by Ray Staff at Trident. Is that right?
Yeah.
Tell us that story.
So there were 3 people who absolutely trained me. Ray Staff, Mike Walker, who was working with Ray at the time, and a guy called Sean Davis, who for a long period of time was the guy who maintained all of the lathes in London. And Sean himself was a mastering and cutting engineer at a studio called IBC. He cut the first acetate that the Rolling Stones ever did.
Wow.
And it was part of a thing to see whether the management at IBC would sign the Stones, and they listened to it and went, "Nah."
What?
But he still cut the first acetate. Ray's very technical. He recently retired, but very technical guy. And Sean also very technical. But Sean had this ability to explain things in different ways until the penny dropped. And I had this kind of mental block on understanding how you could judge how deep a groove is being cut by looking at the width of the groove.
Right.
And so, back then, down the pub, okay, explain. And so, explain. And then it just turns out that, well, actually it's the shape of the stylus. It's an equilateral triangle, so the width equals the depth. And once you know that, you kind of go, oh, obviously.
And it clicked.
But it's those 3 guys between them all taught me important things, not just technical things, but kind of life lessons as well.
Yeah. Amazing. And what artists did you master at that period of time? So I understand that am I right in saying that, sorry, there's a story before we move on to that section. There's a story that you had a time as a clerical worker at the BBC, from what I understand, and they needed, was it a delay? Something to do with delay with cutting, is that right? And you brought that in. How did that come about?
I before Trident, I'd worked at the BBC. I'd wanted to join the BBC as an engineer in radio, so obviously they put me in clerical TV. And what I used to do, the department I was in was called house management. So basically looking after the television centre in its entirety, the building, the studios, and so I could go anywhere. And I used to wander through the sound gallery and the vision galleries and see what people were doing and chat to people. But the BBC also had the transcription department. So I don't know what it was doing particularly at the time that I was working at the BBC, but historically, radio programs were distributed to the Empire on vinyl.
Right.
And if you listen to a record, you get inner groove distortion and a deterioration in quality as it gets to the center.
Yeah.
And so when they were doing the radio programs, they'd start recording it from the outside to the inside, and then the next part of the program would go from the inside to the outside, and then back in. So they're constantly going in and out, so you didn't notice the difference in quality.
Wow.
So anyway, I went to this transcription department, and they had what was then quite new, which was an AMS digital disc cutting delay, and the main room at Trident had one of those as well, and I was just a runner, expendable, and it just caught light. So the room was off air, and I wandered in, to make a cup of tea, and said to Ray, what's the matter? And he said, oh, the delay's gone up in smoke. We're going to have to send it away. The room's going to be off air.
Wow.
And I said, oh, I might be able to get you one of those. And so I phoned up the guy that I'd met at transcription, and they still hadn't got round to installing this piece of kit. So I said, oh, can we rent it from you? And he said, no, we're not allowed to do that because we're the BBC. We're not allowed to do that. But you can borrow it. So I went back into Ray and said, yeah, I can get you one of those. And it was unheard of for a T-boy to, rustle up one of these things at the drop of a hat.
Amazing.
And so, I got moved up the food chain into the tape copy room. And in the end, we had the unit on loan until our one was repaired. And we sent it back with a couple of bottles of scotch, and everyone was happy.
Brilliant. Amazing. So during that period, so was this the early 80s, was it, at this moment in time?
Yeah, it would have been about 24.
Brilliant. And what artists at that moment in time were you working with when you started mastering at Trident?
Okay, so as I say, I started as a runner in January 84. And at that time, Soho was a crazy place because Trident was in Soho between Wardour Street and Dean Street. And there were two runners, and we were up to 24 hours on, 24 hours off, continuous. So if the session, didn't finish until 9 in the morning, you worked from 9 in the morning until 9 in the morning, and then went home.
Right.
But what used to happen was the bands would wait until just before McDonald's was going to close, and then you get a big order for McDonald's, which was down on Shaftesbury Avenue, and so I had to walk down to Shaftesbury Avenue, chucking it down with rain, coming back with a big bag of McDonald's stuff, trying to keep it dry so the paper bag doesn't fall apart. And this lady of mercy, shall we say, came over and went, "Would you like somebody to help you eat that, dearie?" I just went, no. Crazy place to work, and one of the safest places in the whole of London, because of its reputation. They didn't want the police to have to go and deal with anything, so it was all very much self-regulated. One of the safest times I've ever felt in London. Brilliant. I forgot what the question was.
No, it's great. The artist that you're working with at that period of time. So
the first stage was working in the tape copy room. What we used to do, if a song had been mastered in the mastering room, then would have to make 15 IPS copies to send around the world for other mastering engineers to then cut from. And we also did promo cassettes, so that people, PRs and pluggers and whatever, could hear the track that was going to be coming through. So Trident had a contract with Warner's, or WEA as it was then, to do all of their international work. So stuff that had been mastered in the States by, Sterling, Bob Ludwig, Master Disc, all of these places. They would have somebody that was making copy tapes, and some of those tapes would come into us for us to then cut for the UK and Europe. And WEA were, very successful. There was more and more work coming through. And we had an old lathe that wasn't being used, and the cutter head was being used to prop a door open. And so they got this room working, and my first cutting was from these tapes of all of these great American acts. So, Prince and Madonna and Graceland, Van Halen, it was brilliant and a great way to learn, because you're hearing the work of the best. And it's a great way to, train your ears. But the only problem was that they used a studio for making these copy tapes that wasn't really very good. And so sometimes tapes would come in and it would say it had Dolby, but it didn't, or it would say, it didn't, but it did. And sometimes it was Dolby twice on one channel and not on the other. So there was an element of, it wasn't straightforward, but good for learning. And that's how I started doing that. And then Ray and Mike both decided independently that they were going to leave within a couple of weeks of each other. And so the directors came down to me and said, "Do you think you can handle the main room?" And I was young and stupid and said, "Yeah, of course I can. No problem." And went into the main room, and from there it's, just sink or swim. You can either do it or you can't. And fortunately I could. And just before Mike left, he'd been cutting Take On Me, a heart. And what happened was, back then it was really difficult to get radio play. And so producers at Radio 1 would go, "Oh no, we don't like this because of something or other," or, and so they kept doing remixes. And then they got Alan Tarney to do a mix. And so Mike had left by then. So Alan Tarney's mix came in, and I cut it. And that was the one that they went with, and is the one that everybody knows.
And the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah, I think it was about 40 million copies sold, something like that.
It's not too bad.
It's a good start. It's all gone downhill since then, but it was a good start.
Oh, man, what a start, though. That's amazing. So tell us about, so I've seen that you've worked for a few studios before Alchemy. So you've worked at Tape One and Porky's Mastering, and then Abbey Road. So tell us about the transition from Trident into each one of those studios.
Tape One was run by two guys, Barry Ainsworth and Bill Foster. Bill's background was in mastering, and Barry was a great recording, mixing engineer, and I think producer as well.
Yeah.
And Tape One was at the forefront of digital technology at the time. But Barry always had a hankering for a studio. And so Tape One bought Trident and renamed it Audio One. And and ran that for a couple of years. But it was at the time when there was a big shift away from big studios, SSLs, all that sort of thing. It was getting much more into programming, and they just couldn't make it pay. So they closed the studio, but because they had Tape One doing mastering, they moved me across to Tape One.
Okay.
And I was there for a while, and then Tape One closed. It was during one of the inevitable financial crises, bank-led, during the 80s, and the bank just kind of irrationally called in a loan, and did for the company, you know. So then I'd worked with a guy called Dennis Blackham, who's a lovely chap.
Yeah.
He'd gone to work in partnership with George Peckham at Porky's, and so he got me in at Porky's, and I worked there for a while, and then it kind of didn't really work out for a number of reasons. So I was invited to leave nicely.
Right. Okay. Fair enough.
And then Dennis phoned me up and said he'd heard that there was a vacancy at Abbey Road. So I got in touch with Chris Buchanan, who was running the place at the time, and he gave me an interview, and I got the job.
Amazing. Which studio were you in at Abbey Road?
Well, at the time I was there were two mastering rooms. One was room 6, I think, and the other one was called the Penthouse cutting room, because it was near the Penthouse studio. One room had a DMM, and the other room had a DMM and a lacquer BMS-80 lathe.
Yeah.
And I was doing an evening shift, and basically I had an amount of work to do, and it was in my interest to do it in the most efficient way possible. And what you can't have, an acetate is a disc that's exactly like a lacquer, excuse me, but it is the correct size. It's 12 inches. Whereas a lacquer is 14 inches and won't fit on a record player. So it's a way of a record company or an artist to hear what their tracks will sound like on vinyl.
Yeah.
The DMM lathe cuts onto a copper blank, but they only come in 14-inch. So what some people used to do was have a DMM cut, but then a lacquer acetate, even though they sound slightly different. And I'd figured out the difference in setup between the DMM and the lacquer lathe, and so I could cut the DMM and the acetate at the same time, saving me to do 2 passes. And one of the maintenance guys came in and nearly had heart failure. You can't do that. Well, why can't I do that? I'm doing it. You know, what's wrong? Can, you know. But you know, Abbey Road was full of brilliant people, and still, I still know a lot of people that are working there. At the time, it was suffering a bit from underinvestment, but lovely people, absolutely gorgeous. If ever I had to go back to somewhere, I've always said I'd go back to Abbey Road because it was great.
Amazing. And what artists were you mastering at Abbey Road when you were there?
The thing that I discovered was that because I'd always worked in independent studios, you kind of will do anything to get certain jobs. Well, not anything, but if there's another mastering engineer and you see what come in, you go, oh, I'll do that one, because it's something that you want to work on.
Yeah.
At Abbey Road, it was completely different, because there was so much good work going through that people weren't precious, because okay, you can work on that, but you're going to get this instead. And so, consequently, I can't really remember what I did. There was just so much stuff, and it was brilliant.
Incredible. And then I understand then you transitioned in '98 and you started Alchemy with Phil. Is that right? Is that how that all began? Tell us the story about how Alchemy began.
Okay, so I'd done some work with Oasis.
Yeah.
And the last thing I did was the single of Whatever. And I'd always wanted to work in radio, harking back to the hospital radio thing.
Sure.
And I got the chance to do that, to work in commercial radio. And so, totally sensibly, as you do when you're already working at Abbey Road, you go, actually, I'm going to leave. I'm going to go and do radio now. And so, I cut Whatever, and then virtually the next week I was playing it on the radio. But what I discovered was that radio is even less secure than the music industry. And so I actually got in touch with a guy that I'd worked with at Audio One, who was a recording engineer, a chap called Rowan Laxton, and said, why don't we start our own thing? And we did. And we started Alchemy on 15 grand and built it from there.
Wow. Amazing. And then over the last 20 years or so, what artists have you worked with over that period of time that you've enjoyed working on?
Oh, crikey. I think in the early days of Alchemy, it coincided with kind of the peak of drum and bass.
Right.
No, if you think it still hasn't peaked, by the way, but for me, and so I was cutting so much drum and bass, and all of the guys would sort of share a hook or a sample or something, and it got to the point where I'd be sitting with somebody working on something and going, but didn't we do this last week? And they're just going, no, that so and so sample. He's just given it to me. And it was like Groundhog Day, and it was then that or just before then that we bought our first disc cutting lathe, a VMS 80, and we paid £30,000 for it.
Wow!
Which we thought was an awful lot of money, and we drove over and picked it up from a studio in Germany and brought it back. And then after a while, we found out that Sony, who owned Whitfield Street Studios, were going to close it down because they couldn't make it pay. And so what we did was we thought, we'll take on the guys from Sony because the mastering side was making money.
Yeah.
And what we'll do is we'll build 2 mastering rooms, 2 voiceover studios, a couple of edit suites, and some duplication facility on the 29th floor of Centrepoint at the end of Oxford Street. So at that point, I ended up being management rather than engineering.
Right.
Which I didn't really like. In hindsight, I wish I'd carried on doing the engineering. But it was an amazing studio. The mastering rooms, the monitor wall was the windows. And so you'd sit there and you could see all the way down to past St. Paul's, down to Greenwich in that direction. And if you were in the voiceover studios, you could see Windsor Castle. So the views were amazing. And we had some awesome parties. We used to do fireworks parties, and people used to say, "But how are you going to let off fireworks?" And we just went, "Well, you don't have to. Everyone else does it for us. You just look out the window." That was good. Then the landlord did for us, and after a bit of being a bit homeless, we ended up in Brook Green, where we are for the moment until we head off to Lyndhurst and join the rest of our colleagues at R.E.M.
Wow, amazing. And when did the R.E.M transition happen? What year was that?
Last year. We sold the company in August, in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, absolutely crazy. But
that's mad.
It's all gone very dark. I'll put a light on.
You're right there, mate. I was going to say, so slow down there, going, Barry Grint's like disappearing into the ether.
We've been very, very fortunate in that we've been able to carry on working.
Yeah.
Because you're a mastering engineer, you sat on your own in a room, and the three of us there, Phil and Kev, we've each got our own studio, and so you just had to be a bit careful engaging with one another.
Yeah.
But most of the time, you're sitting there and working away.
Absolutely brilliant. So good. Tell us, Baz, about so we're going to ask you some questions about mastering on a lathe, using a lathe, and I really want to find out about half-speed mastering. There's so many people that get so confused with this topic. Tell us about half-speed mastering and how it works.
Okay, so the audio is going at half the speed that it should be, and the turntable on the lathe is going at half the speed that it should be. So once everything shakes down, you've got a record that plays normally.
Yeah.
And half speed's been around for quite a long time. But what used to happen was that we used to have preview tape machines. And instead of having the traditional erase, record, replay heads, a preview machine has two replay heads, and you had a very convoluted tape path. So depending on the speed of the tape, the speed of the turntable, you created a delay by choosing a selection of rollers to just create that delay between the two heads.
Yeah.
So when they were doing half speed, what you also had to do, apart from doubling that delay, you also had to change the playback cards in the tape machine as well, in order to adjust for a thing called the RIAA curve, which made it all very complicated and a little bit haphazard.
Yeah.
Whereas now we actually make that change to the curve in the cutting amps themselves.
Oh, right.
That we can cut from a workstation or just a tape machine in a conventional way. We don't have to worry about putting in special cards. Shall I tell you about the RIAA curve?
Yeah, go for it. Absolutely, mate. Brilliant.
So the idea behind it is that it's kind of like noise reduction.
Yeah.
In that the top end is artificially boosted on the cut, and the bottom end is artificially reduced. And then on playback, the curve's done the other way, so it should all balance out. But it acts like a sort of noise reduction system, which is why you have a phono input on an amplifier, or you need a preamp for a turntable, because it's got that correction EQ in it. as well as boosting the level a bit.
Sure.
And there have been times where people have got in touch and gone, I don't think my record sounds right. And you have to make sure you go through and how are you listening to this? Where have you got the cable plugged in? Because, why would anybody know? Unless you're a mastering engineer or, in the business in some form. Otherwise, it's kind of who sits at home and reads up about RIAA curves? No one. So half speed, it's not a universal, do it half speed and it will automatically be better than normal speed. Half speed is good for long album sides, and for some tricky cuts. If you cut half speed, generally you'll get the impression of the audio being about 3 dBs louder than it would be with a conventional cut, which is why it's good for long album sides. It's also quite good when you've got an imbalance in the running time. So if you've got one side that's 20 minutes and one side 25, you could do one normal speed and the 25 you do half speed, and then the levels come out about equal.
Oh, right. I was going to ask you about that as well. About the different times on the sides of the vinyl. That's really interesting. That's amazing.
But as I say, it's not a universal panacea. There's a job I did recently, and I cut 2 sides normal speed, and then a request came through. No, actually, we want it done half speed, and I was going, I don't think it's going to work. And they said, no, we want it half speed. So I cut it half speed, and to be fair, they got both of them processed and had TVs made so that they could compare. And the normal speed cut was better than the half speed because the audio had a lot of very stereo low bottom end. And if you think, 70 hertz at half speed is 35. So, and with a lot of power behind it, that's a big ask, not only for the cutting amps, but also for the cutter head to try and deliver on. So in that instance, the normal speed was better because those frequencies were just a little bit higher and a little bit more manageable.
Amazing. Thanks so much for that. So do you, when you're doing, I think you said before, maybe I'm paraphrasing here, Baz, but that quality control is paramount when you're doing mastering. So do you get the opportunity to color the masters when they come through as well? So I know that sometimes I think when I was watching other interviews with you and reading interviews that you've done, sometimes you get masters that are digital that get sent to you to put onto vinyl a lot of the time, and then maybe sometimes mixes that come through and you get to just put your own stamp on it, full stop. So do you get the opportunity sometimes to add color to a master using EQ and compression, or how does it work? Maybe digital to vinyl or just a mix straight to mastering?
It depends on what the job is that's come through. If I'm just being asked to recut something and it's already been mastered, then my view is that, well, that's how it should be. And if I have to make a change, it should be the minimum that's needed in order to get it to cut cleanly. That's my job. Get what I've got, get it on disc. A lot of the work that comes through, they're mixes and they need mastering. And all you can do is what you feel is going to make it better. And then, I'll send off WAVs or MP3s or whatever to get it approved before we do anything with it. in essence, for me, what mastering is getting something in and then trying to make it better, and then seeing whether you're right or not.
Absolutely. So do you, as a mastering engineer, when you are speaking to your artists with the communication going backwards and forwards, do they sometimes ask for different versions of the mastering revisions, or do you send a few versions through, or is it usually just one version that they get and then repeat process a few times to get it how the artist wants, or how does that process work?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can second guess what somebody wants. And sometimes the problem is just as simple as the volume. You get a track come through and you think, oh, this is nice, this is quite open, I won't smash this one quite so much. And you send it off and it comes back and they go, oh, well, that's not very loud. Can you make it louder? And you go, oh, right, yeah, okay then. And conversely, you get something that's, I don't know, rocky or heavy metal or something, and you just think, yeah, this is going to be great. Turn it up to 11. And then it comes back and they go, oh, no, we wanted it a bit more dynamic than that. So it's difficult to second guess sometimes. But it's easily solved. You just do a revision. And I think the most useful thing that people can do sending their work in is a clue of how loud they're expecting something to come back to them, because that will whittle out quite a lot of potential needs for revision.
Makes sense. And with LUFS, and I know that obviously we went through the Loudness wars and the noughties, and what are your feelings and thoughts with, I know that you cut loads and loads of vinyl, but when you're mastering, and I'm guessing it's completely different, because I know a lot of mastering engineers, they're just mastering, but they're mastering in the digital realm rather than mastering for vinyl. So how to put this, but when you're mastering for streaming services, do you tend to go for -14 LUFS, what Spotify and iTunes are asking for, or sometimes do your clients want it to be a bit louder at, say, -11, -10? What do you tend to usually go for? What's your average?
To be honest, I don't really set much store by LUFS.
Okay.
We use Sequoia at work, and so if you're compiling an album, what you can do is say, okay, all of these tracks are just for LUFS, and then it will go off and churn a bunch of numbers, turn tracks up, turn them down, whatever, and then you go back through, and 9 times out of 10, as you're going through, you're going, no, that needs to be louder. No, that's too loud. That needs to be a bit quieter. Yeah. So I don't think that it's at a place where you can really set much store by it. And I've never met an A&R man who's going to say, actually, could you turn that down a little bit for me?
Yeah.
And you're only generally turning out one master for digital in all its shapes and sizes. So, they'll use it for streaming. They'll use it maybe on a CD. You don't want to have a quiet track on a CD. No. So, you kind of have to just be, I was going to say commercial about it, realistic. Yeah. Stuff where I'm really pushing it, I'll probably have it so at most it's -5 dB full scale.
Yeah.
And for stuff that's a bit more open, or needs to be a bit more open, -10. And that's what I go to. So yeah, I've never ever had anybody say, oh, we're going to send this to all of the streaming services. Can you optimize a file for each one, please?
Right.
So you kind of go, well, it's a road to nowhere. I think you have to do the master, get it the best it can be, and then just accept that stuff's going to happen to it. And I think, I'm not sure, I think someone was telling me that, is it Apple, maybe Spotify, that the adjustment's actually done on your device.
Right.
It's not done by them. And if you turn that off, then you don't get all of that correction. So if you've sent a quiet master, you'll hear a quiet master.
All right.
You know, whether that's true or not, but I don't really stress too much about LUFS. There was going back to Trident. There was it was a great resource for knowledge of people with loads of experience who've worked on amazing material. And the story goes that there was an assistant working on a recording session, and with one of Trident's greats. You know, it could have been Ken Scott, could have been, you know, anyone. The band broke to go and get some lunch, and the tape op said, I didn't want to say anything during the session, but I noticed that the level's really hot on the bass guitar track. You know, it's the VU's really going for it. And the engineer went, well done for not saying anything. Let's check it out. And so they soloed the bass guitar track, and the engineer said, so, you know, what do you think? How does it sound? And the op went, it sounds fantastic. And the engineer said, yeah, you know, meters are a guide. It's your ears that count. And it's true.
So good. I know my mentor, Tony Jack the Bear Mance, I know who's interviewed you before as well, Baz. And he said, you know, I remember him saying to me a few weeks ago, just close your eyes sometimes, you know, rather than reading the meters, just listen to the music and just let the music guide you. And, you know, feel the music as well, rather than, you know, looking at all these like fancy meters, because we all have gear acquisition syndrome, don't we, as engineers? I'm guessing like amateurs, I don't know if you do as well, Baz, from time to time, but amateurs, intermediates and pros, we look at all these like amazing companies, you know, offering all these amazing plugins where they're going, oh, that looks great, that looks pretty, let's go with that, let's spend 200 quid on it. But then do we actually need it for what we're doing? And it's a really interesting topic. What about as well, so mix engineers, what was your thoughts and feelings on this? Mix engineers doing their own masters. So I know that a lot of mix engineers, especially maybe amateurs and intermediates, can't afford sometimes to use a mastering engineer. And so what's your thoughts and what's your advice maybe for a mix engineer that does their own masters?
Okay, I think that it's always great if you can get another set of ears on a job. You know, if there is a fault in the acoustics of the room, or the monitoring isn't true for some reason, mastering it yourself, you're not going to hear that. Whereas if you've got another pair of ears on it, at least you've got a chance of somebody going, oh, I'm not sure about this. You know, are you sure that this is right? You know, I think one of the great things about where we are at the moment is when I started, all of the music was bands that had been signed to record labels, because recording studios were so expensive. And, you know, if you wanted to record in a specific space that wasn't the studio, you had a dirty, great big articulated lorry rock up with a massive mixing desk in it. So now the fact that, you know, we can just take a laptop and go into any space and do some recording or do some mixing, I think incredibly liberating. Just think, back to when I started, of all of the talent that never got signed, never got an opportunity to let people hear their work. And I mean, now, okay, it's a struggle trying to filter things that are available to listen to. But at least, you've got a good chance of hearing some gold that you wouldn't have heard if we didn't have the technology that we've got now. So I think all of that is incredibly liberating. But, you have to work with what you've got. Some people they'll use artificial intelligence for mastering because it's quite cheap. And I don't have a problem with that at all. If it helps you get to where you want to be, that's great. What I would say is that you put a track through these things and you get the master back. You take the master and you put it through again and it masters it again. So it's either mastered it or it hasn't mastered it. It can't just keep doing more and more of the same thing. And I don't think that AI will ever have feel. And it's what Jack was saying about closing your eyes, ignore the meters, and you're looking for the feel of any given piece of music. And I don't think you can get that with AI. It's something that I miss with some of the music where the drums are quantized, everything's MIDI or whatever. With real bands, there's the old joke that with a real band, when it gets to the chorus, the tempo just lifts a little bit because that's the bit the drummer knows. And it's true, that those slight shifts in timing are what makes a track.
Absolutely, that human, like you said, Baz, that human feel. I remember watching a documentary fairly recently. I think it was a Foo Fighters documentary, and they said that, excuse my French, but kind of humans are meant to fuck up a little bit. They're meant to there's meant to be that, not inconsistency, but there's meant to be that kind of human feel to music. So when you've got 4 or 5 human beings in a room making music together, things aren't always meant to perfectly line up. Things are meant to be a little bit off, but then that's how maybe you connect with a song. But then completely agree with you with AI. I think I completely agree. AI is fantastic. One of my best mates is has gone into music patency. So he gets quite a few people coming to him with inventions and different apps and plugins and stuff like that. It's phenomenal what he does. And I think AI is brilliant, but at the same time, completely agree. However, if you go to a mastering engineer, then like you said, you're going to get another set of ears, and then you're also going to get that feel as well. So you're going to feel the music when it comes through to you. Like you said, you get a metal track and you go, yay, great, and this is good fun. Or, or you go, oh yeah, another drum and bass track. Okay, well, let's, have some fun with that. But like you said, it kind of gives it that human vibe and element to it. And it's just great. I don't know if you agree, but it's great to collaborate. I think it's fantastic fun, and the fact that, like you said, now we've got this amazing technology, the fact that we can now create music at home online with our friends or whoever. But then I was talking to Bob Olsen last night, and we were talking about how hard it is to be heard above the noise, though, sometimes as well, because there's that many people doing it. And I'm sure record labels are now looking at artists going, oh, which one do we sign? And who's got the biggest following? What's the most popular? It must be a logistical nightmare for record labels to suss out who to go with. And budgets are obviously nowhere near, nowhere near as high as what they were back in the 80s and the 90s and the noughties. But have you noticed a shift in artists coming to you stylistically, or is it very varied that comes through your online door?
It's extremely varied.
Right.
I'm happy to say. I think that there was an instance with Ray when he was at Trident, and there was a chap who used to come in and get Ray to cut this guy's reggae releases.
Right.
And so he'd be doing that, and then he's saying, "Oh, right, I'm off to somewhere else to cut this band or whatever." And I said, "But why are you doing that? Because Ray just did this one, which was." Yeah. And he went, "Oh, no. Ray does reggae. That's what Ray does." And if any mastering engineer only did one genre, you'd starve. There isn't enough reggae in the UK to keep one mastering engineer fed. So we all work across the board, and that's one of the things that I really love about it, because most of the stuff these days is single track. Occasionally you get an album, a lot of it's single track, which means that you're working intensely for a relatively short period of time on something, and then you're getting something completely new to work on again, and it stops any kind of fatigue, because it's kind of, oh wow, oh wow, you're constantly picking up something that you've never heard before, and that's great. I really love that.
Yeah. Love it, absolutely love it. And it's like, so how many masters are you doing a day on average then, or how many do you tend to do a week, or is there no set routine to a week?
It really depends on what it is. Generally a normal day. So I now work a shift system. So I do a working week over 3 days. So I work Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So 3 12-hour days. And all of my days will always have a mix of out and out mastering, bit of restoration, bit of cutting. So it's not really possible to kind of say how much mastering, because there have been days where I've done maybe cut 6 albums.
Wow.
And then there's other days where I've been out and out mastering, and I will have done yay many tracks. It's difficult to say. But going back on the communication thing, something that I find quite annoying is when you're working with a label, they won't necessarily tell the mix engineer who the mastering engineer is, or the mastering engineer who the mix engineer is, and they will extract from an email what they think is a pertinent comment by the mix engineer and just send it to you. So you've got no idea who said it, and quite often it's not actually the bit of information that you need.
Wow.
Whereas it would be much easier if they just went, "Oh, so-and-so mixed this, let me just hook you up because he's got a few things that he wants you to think about." Nobody's going to get upset about being put in touch with a colleague who both of you only want to try and get the thing sounding the best it can be. So why not have a conversation? You would do if it was an attended session. They'd be sitting next to you. So I don't see why email prevents that dialogue.
Absolutely, and especially now we've got things like Zoom and FaceTime as well. Surely you're absolutely right. Maybe just like have a 5-10 minute chat, out of the mix engineer's day, and go, right, okay, mate, what needs to be done? What do you feel the track needs, and where do you want me to go with it, and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, completely. I didn't even realize that, to be honest, that's how it worked with labels. To be fair, because 9 times out of 10 with my clients that I master, I speak to them about what's the vibe of the track, and tell us the backstory, and who do you want, who's your inspiration, what color do you want on there, and give me a couple of. I know some engineers go, no, I don't do references, never touch references in a million years. But for me, as a mastering engineer that's only been doing it for 2 or 3 years and constantly learning all the time, I need references. So when my artists come to me, I need them to give me a good guide, and that kind of that massively helps.
Yeah.
You know, and like you said, you know, how you said in the 80s when you were listening to and remastering like Bon Jovi and Van Halen and doing all those bands, and that's how you started. You know, that's phenomenal, because we all need that education to learn and listen. But you're absolutely right, we need that communication from people as well. Otherwise, we're kind of shooting in the dark, I guess.
Yeah.
You know?
Some of the mixes from back then, there was, I think what first struck me, I was working on some mixes that Bob Clearmountain had done. And what really struck me was that everything in the track, every instrument had its place in left to right. It had its place, but also frequency wise, high to low or low to high, whichever way you want to go.
Interesting.
And I find that partly because so many people have to wear every hat. You know, back when I started, there was a producer, there was a recording engineer, there was a mixing engineer, there was a mastering. You know, now quite often it's all the artist.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes a really good thing to do once you've finished doing the recording would be to stop, go and have a cup of tea, watch a bit of telly, and then come back with a mixing engineer's head on and start thinking about positioning what you've recorded to, you know, get a good mix. I get tracks that come in and they're virtually mono. I get tracks that come in and somebody's tried to go super wide, so it comes out the back of your head. And a lot of people don't concern themselves with mono compatibility anymore. And there was a period of time when I suppose, yeah, you know, radio was stereo, all the things we listened to was stereo. Phones now are generally stereo, but you know, downstairs in my lounge, I've just got a little Sonos speaker.
Oh, right.
So anything that doesn't have mono compatibility is going to sound pretty odd on that. And I'm not the only person that's just got a, you know, little wireless speaker chucked in a room somewhere.
Yeah.
So one of my big things is to still try and retain mono compatibility. I always listen in mono, and also if you listen in mono and phase reverse, you can cancel out the center and just hear what's happening in the sides.
Oh, right. Okay.
Which is really revealing. It will really show up clicks and distortion. And sometimes you get a track where it doesn't seem overly bright or harsh, but it's quite fatiguing.
Yeah.
And often, if you listen in mono and phase reverse, you'll find that in the sides there's like a harsh edge on a guitar or something like that, and that's what's making it seem fatiguing. And you just manage that, and then the track will all gel up and sound much better.
Fantastic. And is this all in Sequoia when you're looking at this? But do you use RX as well, or is it mainly in Sequoia that you approach this?
It's mainly Sequoia. There are some RX elements that will run in Sequoia.
Yeah.
The mono phase reverse thing is just on the monitoring controller on the desk.
Yeah.
And you know, I'd say a lot of what I do in the box, because it gives me more control. You know, when I started, I think you've frozen.
In a sec. Am I?
There we go.
All good. Just checking I'm still working. Yeah.
Yeah. When I started, it was pre-computers, pre-internet. Everything was analog, and I think for the recording and mixing process, where the kind of creative origination is happening,
Yeah.
I can completely get, you know, using different bits of outboard in order to get to where you want to be with a particular sound. And with mastering, I take the view that what I'm trying to do is more corrective. And so, you know, obviously we have analog equipment, and sometimes analog is definitely the way to go. Sometimes a hybrid. But, you know, I can just achieve so much in the box. And it may be that I'll do the bulk of the work and then just bounce it through some analog bit of kit just to get the last bit. But a lot of it you can achieve in the box.
Amazing. And would you suggest that anyone starting out mastering from scratch, that you can achieve good masters in the box as long as you've got decent converters, would you say, and a decent room and decent speakers? Do you need all the outboard gear as well, would you say? Or, you know, obviously I know that you, as you said, you know, maybe for some, I don't know, some tracks you might want to add those colors and those flavors in there, but can you predominantly do pretty much everything in the box, do you feel, for a new mastering engineer?
Yeah, these days I think you can. I'm just not really a big fan of having lots and lots and lots of kit. I think that you know, if you get a piece of kit in on demo, you can relatively quickly find out whether you like it or not. I'm a big fan of EQs where I know what I want to do and I can use it and get to where I want to go. I'm not a big fan of, you know, having to do the gain range and the Q range and then, you know, on toggle switches and then kind of go, oh no, I've run out of, I need to get to that frequency, but I've used that there, so I've got to switch that over to there. So that, you know, I want something that's straightforward. In our rooms, we have Sontec EQs, which are brilliant. They're made by a guy called Burgess McLean, and basically his EQs, he decided to use all the good frequencies, and he's ignored all the bad ones. So, hurrah!
Excellent, genius.
So it's, you know, it's a great sounding EQ. I've got an Alicia compressor, which is incredibly versatile. So, you know, it can almost be any compressor that you like. Back EQ, and tube amplifier, Whitestone, that the guy brought in, and I looked at it wearily, and then sort of plugged it in, ran some stuff through it, and thought, oh shit, I'm gonna have to buy this. And it was while we were in the company, you know, I could have waited a couple of months and then tried to persuade Air to buy it, but I actually thought this is really good, so I spent our money to buy it, you know. But it is a fantastic piece of kit.
Amazing.
And you know, for A to Ds, D to As, my personal thing is I want something that's as neutral as possible. I don't really go for the converters that add color, because I want to do that. I don't want a box doing something already. You know, I'll just give it to me how it is, and then, you know, I'll do what I want to do. And just going back onto refs, people send refs. Yes, it's great when they send a ref. And what I tend to do is I'll do what I think, and then I'll take their ref and compare what I've done to their ref.
Right.
Just to see whether I'm in the ballpark more than anything else. And I think, you know, you can kind of have something that you think this is exactly what the track needs, and then you hear the ref, and sometimes you go, oh no, I don't think that's right, and other times you go, oh, I hadn't thought of that, I'll give that a go. And so refs are great, and it also gives you a ballpark idea of how much limiting they're expecting on their track coming back.
Yeah. Amazing. Thanks, Baz. What about so you said that you use Sequoia. What do you use any third-party plugins as well at the minute? Any particular third-party plugins that you particularly enjoy when you're mastering at the moment?
Yeah, I use Waves plugins quite a bit. I'm fortunately one of their artists, and so I have access to all of their plugins, which is very nice of them. Some of them, are more geared to the recording mixing process than mastering. But sometimes, you just need something, and you'll find a get out of jail plugin. There was a track that I had in, and it sounded really, really weird because it was completely dry, and it was sort of a vocal acoustic guitar, and it was like it was in an anechoic chamber. And this doesn't sound right. And then so I hiked out the Waves Abbey Road plate reverb. Just stuck a little bit of reverb in there, and you kind of, that's it. That's much better. But I've used that, I don't know, twice in a year.
Yeah.
But it was just kind of, oh, that's handy. I'll hike that one out and give that a spin.
Amazing. I've really enjoyed, I don't know if you tried it yet, the Oak Sound Soothe 2. So I know a lot of engineers I know are really enjoying that plugin. Have you given that one a blast yet?
No, I haven't. I did get a demo of Soothe early on. Why didn't I? There must have been a reason why I didn't, get it. I mean, they're not hideously expensive, the plugins. But yeah, I don't know why.
Fair enough. Yeah, I'm really enjoying.
Try Soothe 2. I'll give it a go.
Yeah, give it a blast. It's really good. I'm loving the. I tend to use all the FabFilter stuff, Wave stuff as well. Plugin Alliance. Oh, the new recently got to test. I was one of the very lucky to be one of the beta testers with Dirk Ulrich at Plugin Alliance Brainworks, and he sent me across the new limiter to give a blast, and it was brilliant. Really, really good. It's true peak limiter. It's fantastic.
Right. Okay. Yeah. You broke up at the crucial. He said.
Oh, sorry. I'll go again. Yeah. I got to be one of the beta testers for Plugin Alliance for their new limiter, the True Peak limiter. So Dirk very kindly gave me it to try out, and it's fantastic. Really, really good. And I know a lot of other engineers have been raving about it. I think sometimes I'm sure you get this all the time where everyone's there going, oh, try this plugin. This plugin's going to change your life. And then sometimes you check it out and you go, well, it's all right, and it's not, doesn't really make much of a difference. But it amazes me, though, that like yourself, that so many engineers love Waves, and, they've been there for 20 odd years plus, and they're still going strong. It's fantastic. And I need to dig into Waves plugins a bit more, to be honest, and give them more of a shot, because I'm very much, I think I kind of stick to what I know, but I love experimenting as well. But it's really, really good fun. What about your speakers as well, Baz? What speakers do you tend to master on at the moment?
So in Kev Tuffy's room, he's got some ATCs, where we had the amps modified by ATC. They came up with a revamp and came in and modded them. Phil has got ATCs upstairs as well. In my room, I've got Kev Reference, which is a bit left field. They look a bit like B&W Nautilus speakers.
Oh, right, okay.
But what happened was harking back to when I started cutting, I thought that I should get a record player, seeing as I was making records, so that I could check my work. I got married 3 months after starting at Trident as a runner. So we were young, we had no money. I need to get a record player, and so we toddled off to a hi-fi shop called Lasky's, and wandered around. And it was when Dire Straits' Brothers in Arms had come out on CD.
Oh wow!
And so we're wandering around, listening to sort of different systems, and I kept coming back to this one system, and that was Kef speakers. So I ended up spending just on the speakers what my wife had budgeted for the whole system.
Oh wow!
So I was a little bit in the doghouse. But then when I started Alchemy, the speakers, came to Alchemy and had been used in various guises. So when I was building my room, I had speakers in there just as a way of making noise and checking out how the room was sounding.
Yeah.
And at the end, they sounded pretty good, but they didn't quite have the bass extension that I needed. And so I got onto Kef, and they had a demo pair out at a studio. They'd taken them back, refurbed them, and then they said, try these. And I went, yeah, these are great. And they went, okay, well, you can borrow them. And I've been borrowing them ever since.
Amazing.
And they're powered by an ATC amp, which really kind of sorted the last bit out. It really kind of gave me the bass extension, smoothed the whole bass end out. And I really like them.
Fantastic, amazing. Thanks so much for that, Baz. Great. So with headphones as well, quality control. So do you use any headphones just for a bit of quality control from time to time, or is it mainly speakers that you tend to use when you're mastering?
I just use speakers.
Yeah.
Always I've done. I think when you can do something like, as I said before, mono phase reverse, you can really hear the clicks and distortion and the sort of things that you would hear on headphones. Outside of that, not really for me. I'm not saying it's wrong, it's just not my thing.
Yeah, completely. Every engineer is different. Absolutely. Yeah. Amazing. I think you're cracking up there slightly, Baz. Oh no, I think you got a connection again. Brilliant. Yeah. So with vinyl, obviously, I know that you're cutting loads of vinyl. And what do you think? Why do you think that there's been a massive resurgence in people buying vinyl records over the past few years?
I think that there was a piece somewhere or other that that consumers now expect highly compressed audio.
Yeah.
And I don't think that is the case necessarily. A lot of the vinyl that's reissued, is old recordings. They aren't at the digital level, and people buy the vinyl and they think, oh, it sounds more open, or it sounds more warm, or whatever. And I think that over limiting can flatten everything so much that nothing really stands out, and it's just not very engaging sometimes.
Yeah.
My daughter has got her record player set up. She's up north, and it was her birthday recently, and she wanted Rumours Fleetwood Mac on vinyl.
All right.
And you kind of go, good. So for the work that we do, where we're doing the digital mastering and we're also doing the cutting. For the cut, we just take off all of that extra digital limiting.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we'd have to turn it all down to get it to cut anyway. So you might as well take all of that limiting away and give yourself a nice dynamic open sound, which vinyl loves. Vinyl's quite a musical medium, and things that don't sound great really don't sound great on vinyl.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I mean, thanks so much for that, Baz. Next question, maybe before we move on to, we've had some questions through for you. I would say, where are you going next? Where's the Barry Grint story going now? So we've talked about what happened to you in the 80s and the 90s, the naughty 2010 onwards as well. But what's next for your journey?
Well, as we've mentioned, R.E.M bought Alchemy.
Yeah.
And at the moment, there's some building work going on at the studios. Once that's finished, then we're going to be building some new mastering rooms over there.
Yeah.
And we'll move Alchemy into R.E.M. So they'll be building 3 rooms to accommodate that. And then they've got a really exciting, good young team of engineers. And my role really is to help them develop their careers, bring them forward, and make them the next top engineers for everybody to work with, which for me would be a fantastic legacy. If R.E.M mastering is the place for everybody desperate to go there to get their mastering done, then that's a legacy that I'll be really pleased with.
Love that. Absolutely love that. I love the fact that you're training the next generation as well and helping them with your legacy. That's so good. Thanks for that, Baz.
One of the things that's really annoying, actually, is Kevin that works in the room next to me, Kev Tuffy.
Yeah.
He last year got a Grammy for a track that he worked on. I've never even got a swimming certificate.
Oh,
outrageous.
There's still time. There's still time.
Oh, maybe with a front crawl I might get there, but
I'm sure Barry, completely. There's still time, mate. Still time. To be fair though, your back catalogue is, I love it. It's phenomenal, and thank you for all the tracks you've mastered over the years. It's been an absolute pleasure to listen to. And yeah, so before you go, if that's cool with you, sir, I've got a couple of questions that have come through from the community and from YouTube. So one of the questions says, Barry, love your work. One question, do you prefer EQ before, oh, this is an old one. I think I've asked this question before a few times. Do you prefer EQ before compression or compression before EQ?
My normal setup would be EQ before compression.
Yeah.
But it depends on the source. If you're trying to work and just constantly having problems because peaks are shooting through, well, it makes sense to then manage those peaks. Maybe not, how you would have it at the end, but just enough so that you can get in and do your thing, without running out of headroom, basically.
Yeah.
So either way, whatever sounds right.
Yeah, completely. That's great. Thanks, Baz. So another question that's come through as well. So would love some more basic advice on a master bus. So a couple of hacks for those of us churning out demos on a regular basis and can't afford to send it to a new set of ears. So any tips on a master bus for mix engineers mastering their own tracks?
That's a tricky one, because for work that's coming in to me for mastering, a lot of people will ask whether they should keep their kind of mix bus processing in or out. And I think the answer to that is keep it in, unless you've got a limiter really slamming hard, in which case either take that out or back it off. But otherwise, that forms part of the glue for the mix. So in which case, keep it in. And I think advice. I don't know. That's tricky. I mean, because I've never been a mix engineer, I've only ever done mastering. I would be really reluctant to say, "Oh, what you need to do is this," because I've got no idea. No, don't know. Sorry.
That's fine. Absolutely fine, though. But thanks for the question. That's great. Thanks, though, Baz. And so we've got other people just saying that someone's mentioned, we were talking about AI earlier on, saying that, so I've never sat down and explained my vision of a track with AI. So true. Yeah, completely. Like we were talking about earlier on, that, having the feel and having another human being at the other end listening to a track and collaborating, it's absolutely phenomenal. Just checking this.
With AI, there's an inbuilt assumption that you want it loud. And, if you had an album and you've got some loud tracks and then you've got one that's quite laid back, you send that all into AI, and the laid back one will be as loud as everything else when it's not supposed to be like that. It's supposed to be set back a bit. AI will improve. And as I say, if you can't afford for somebody to do your mastering, then it's great that it's there.
Yeah. Great. Thanks so much for that, Baz. That's brilliant. We have another question through. So are you a fan of 70 hertz filter Motown style when mastering to remove low end to get more level?
I have never rolled off at 70 hertz. Between 15 and 30 hertz, maybe. And part of having a filtering off the bottom end is just to make sure there's no DC in the audio, because cutting amps really don't like trying to cut DC. they just go no. It's making sure that isn't there. There was a guy who came in yesterday. He'd got TPs of a cut that I'd done, and he'd got a pressing, and he was concerned because we did the cut half speed. It was quite sort of jazzy, and he said it's just not as loud as this pressing that I've got.
Yeah.
So I said it's okay, come in and we'll have a listen and see what's going on. And the pressing, I think, was mastered in America, I think, a while ago. And what they'd done was the first track, the outer track, was much louder than you would expect for the length of the side. And then as you get the tracks going in, they're all a little bit quieter than the one before. And so if you go from the outside and then play the inside, there's this, big volume jump. And so he was comparing his first track with that first track, and they're not going to be the same. Yeah. But then, all of the tricks that you can do to get more level on are rolling off the bass, making the bottom end more mono, narrowing the stereo width all across the track. All of these things will save space and enable you to cut that side louder. But then, I said, this is how your music will sound if I do that. And he was mortified. There was no bottom end, there was no stereo. I said, but that's exactly what's on that pressing. So I don't hold. I kind of call it cheating. I don't hold with cheating. If you've spent ages getting a track sounding right, then you want to do the minimum necessary if you have to change anything at all to get it onto vinyl. So no, I would never roll off at 70 hertz.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Baz. I've got another question. So do you use any clippers when you're limiting, or is it literally just a limiter when you're mastering, or do you use a clipper or a limiter, should I say? So anything along those lines?
I will use a limiter. Quite often I'll use more than one. I think that sometimes, trying to do it all in one is ambitious.
Right.
So typically, I'll use a fat filter and set it up, because I quite like to get the kick drum bottom end quite tight first of all, and I'll use it gently, but just to give a bit of definition.
Yeah.
And then I'll back off the output of that, and then run it into probably a multiband for some small tweaks and a bit more of a lift, or possibly that will get me to where I want to be.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't quite do it, then again, just ease the output down a little bit and run a third limiter just to get me that last stage. I think it's important, as you would do with analog, with gain staging. I think in digits equally is important, and you need to make sure that at no point are you overloading, if you see what I mean.
I do.
Sometimes I'll go through and I'll get it all how I think it should be, but then I'll switch out all the limiters and go through just to make sure that there's nothing that's too loud, and then I'll put the limiters back in and check that I've got the gain how I want it. So yeah, I don't use clippers, and I don't try and get over ambitious with any one limiter.
That's amazing. Thanks so much for that, Baz, because I know there's so many mastering engineers, or amateur mastering engineers, that I've talked to just go, oh yeah, I'll just put one limiter at the end and that's it. But then I was watching, I think it was Ian Shepherd that was saying about gain staging. This was a couple of years ago, and that was a eureka moment for me when I suddenly realized, great, I could gain stage and maybe use a gain plug-in, halfway through my chain, or use a second limiter like you said, and makes a world of difference. But thanks for that insight, Baz. That's absolutely brilliant. What about dithering as well, and bit rate as well? So how do you tend to approach dithering when you're mastering?
So I will work at the format that the source is supplied at.
Yeah.
And then generally I'll sort it out in RX. So I'll run out the master at the same bit depth and sample rate that I've had the track in at, and then use RX.
Amazing. Thanks so much for that, Baz. So we've got one last question through for you. So do you have preferred, I think we've already gone through, it's an RMS target level when mastering post Loudness wars? So again, I think you've already answered that question, Baz, if I'm right in saying so, about what level you tend to go for. And also it seems that 96K 24-bit is the new HD master standard. Would you agree with that?
I think yes, I probably would. 24-192 is still a bit unwieldy. I've done work at that and digitized at that sample rate, but it is a bit unwieldy. 24-96. My feeling is that you don't perceive a massive improvement between 2496 and 24192. 2496, I think, is an easier format to deal with.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. I think, to be fair, though, is the average Joe public really going to hear the difference between those two levels, between 192 and 96?
The way that the industry used to be was that the pros were always working at a better quality than was available domestically.
Yeah.
So masters were done onto 1/2 inch, and people at home were listening on cassette and vinyl. That kind of blurred with CDs, because there was a period of time when we were all 16-bit 44.1.
Yeah.
And now I think we in the industry should be working at higher bit rates and sample rates, even though it's not necessarily a consumer format, because it's very likely that it will be in the future.
Yeah, completely. And I think we've seen this with Tidal as well. So I know that the industry has massively changed with Spotify and how streaming works now, but then Tidal then came out, and all of a sudden we've got these high-res masters that are getting pumped out to our ears as well, which is amazing. And my last question to you is that what's your feelings and thoughts that and I've asked this to a couple of other engineers as well, that the average consumer now predominantly consumes music on headphones rather than speakers, and it's been a massive shift, because I'm guessing because of the iPod originally, and obviously the phone now as well. So do you, when you're mastering, do you have in mind what the consumer will be listening to on their headphones as well as what they'll be listening to on their speakers?
Not specifically, no, because it's going back to what I was saying before. You know, I'm trying to get a track to sound the best that I can get it to be.
Yeah.
So am I then going to compromise that for headphones, or am I going to compromise that for streaming, or am I going to compromise that, you know, for another format?
Yeah.
You know, you can't win them all. All you can do is say, right, this is the best that it can be.
Yeah.
And in a way, it's sort of with the streaming services and with MFIT. You know, MFIT, the encoders can't handle full scale digital audio.
Yeah.
So the level has to be dropped in order to make sure that the encoders don't crap out.
Yeah.
The thing that I don't understand is, why does everybody have to change their master in order to accommodate the technical limitation? Shouldn't the people be working on the technical limitation and removing it? And I think streaming services as well, you know, why are we having to do these compromises? Surely it's down to you to sort out the technicals.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks so much for that, Baz. That's amazing.
IT.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Yeah, so no, thanks so much for your time today, Baz. So any famous last words to leave us with? Anything else you want to tell everyone?
I'm just shocked that we've got this far without a joke.
Oh, I know. Tell us one before you go. Tell us one. No?
What's the difference between a drummer and a drum machine?
What is the difference?
You only have to punch the pattern into a drum machine once.
Amazing.
There you go.
Brilliant. Anyone that was watching right now may be aware that on Baz's Facebook, literally almost every day, would you say, Baz, that you're posting new jokes up? It's absolutely brilliant. And since getting to know Baz Well, I really enjoy it because I'm a dad. Because it's like it's dad joke central, right? I think maybe once you become a dad, then you get it. Oh, amazing! But no, Baz, thank you for your time today. Thank you for your legacy and all the great music that you've given us over the years and that you've mastered. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your dad jokes, mate, because I really appreciate them on Facebook every day as well.
You know, if any of the guys have questions, then just stick them up on the page, and if I can answer them, if I can help, I'll do my best.
Baz, thank you so much, mate. That's brilliant. So anyone that what Barry's referring to, go to www.facebook.com/groups/produce, mix, fix, and conquer. The community we've actually built up now. We were originally at 3 people, up to now 2,200 on the community. There are some phenomenal world-class engineers, including Baz and Bob Katz, amongst many other engineers such as Steve Boffman. There is such a great amount of people on there, but also there's lots of amateurs and intermediates as well. And we're all supporting and learning from one another in a really positive environment as well. So Barry, thank you so much for your time today, sir. I would actually tell everyone, yeah, definitely send Baz through some questions on PMFC. And yeah, let's do this. So Baz, feel free just to stay online just for a sec. And I'm going to end the live stream now as well. But thanks, everyone. And thanks for joining the live today. And we'll see you soon.